So let's talk about Widow and also Hanzo and just the concept of snipers in general, in particular sniper one-shots. You see, there was a post made on competitive Overwatch recently that talked about hot take, snipers are strangling player base growth. Now, I have not read this in full. I looked at it a little bit and I was like, this might be something interesting to discuss a little bit because I do have some takes about snipers, health for the game. And my take, as usual, is going to be more nuanced than what you're going to read on either side of the issue. I'm going to give you my opinion, not only from my own personal experience, from what I think would make sense from a game balance perspective, and also maybe investigate some of the issues that are causing this to be such an issue that some people haven't discussed previously. So, hot take, snipers are strangling player growth. Am I talking about snipers generally as a gameplay mechanic? Kind of snipers as first-person shooters, the most controversial design first-person games. You decide to examine the things that affected how players felt about their deaths in TFC. Our starting theory was that for death to be a positive experience, players had to feel that they could avoid dying if they'd done something different. We found two factors that seemed to be important in the light of that theory. The first is whether or not you understood what killed you. If you don't know what killed you, that death is failing and providing you the feedback it's supposed to, and you won't be able to figure out what you could have done differently. The second was whether you felt like you're actually engaged with the person who killed you. Dying to somebody who you weren't engaged with, especially when you're already engaged with somebody else, was aggravating. Even worse was dying to somebody who you couldn't have engaged with even if you chose to. Now, that last point is the most important point of all. I think not knowing what you died to is honestly an admirable goal, but honestly completely unrealistic, right? There's just too many times where the deaths are going to happen. It's going to happen. You can't avoid it. People aren't going to be attentive enough to the gameplay to know why they died all the time. We see this all the time. The second thing, where you felt you actually engaged the person who killed you, that's understandable, but that's also very, very biased towards short-ranged heroes, which in a game like Overwatch has a lot of range dynamics of long and short ranges, saying that, oh, well, I only feel like I engaged with you because the Reinhardt walked on top of me. Let me ask you guys a question. Do you, as a Zenyatta, feel any better when the Sombra hacks you and one-shots you in the backline? Does that make you feel, oh, I engaged that person, therefore that feels good? No, that by itself isn't a good enough parameter. And the last one is a really good point, because the point says dying to someone who you couldn't have engaged with, even if you chose to. If I died to a Widowmaker, but I go, I'm an idiot, why am I sending out in the open? I could have played in a different position where I still could have contributed, or I could have taken an off angle or a flank and actually engaged her directly. And I think that's something that's very, very important. And this gets to my point. There are too many points in Overwatch where that's just not possible. You see, Overwatch is, by design, a map or a game where there are a lot of different maps and there's a lot of different dynamics with the maps. So if I pick, a Lijiang Tower Control Center, that's the first one that immediately comes to mind, I'm going, oh, well, they're not going to be playing Widowmaker on that map, but you can probably see where I'm going with this. Wow, that's tough. Second point especially. Not a lot of nuance there. Second point especially. First point and also second and third point to an extent as well. Second point as well. First and third point as well. Second point as well. You guys see the problem here? See, the problem actually is not only a specific type of map, but a specific map, it's a specific type of map. Overwatch has an escort problem, ladies and gentlemen. We're all talking about push, but actually escort is one of the most unbalanced, unfun game modes in the entire game. It has actually nothing to do with the concept of escort. The escort is a disadvantage for the people escorting it, but it's actually just the fact that you have to push the payload in these monstrously long sightlines. Now, some of these maps are doable. Like, Jungertown can be really, really, really rough, but at least has some flank routes that allow you, remember what we talked about at the previous point, being able to engage on the target that you're actually focusing on. Shimbali, same thing. You can theoretically rotate on attack up through top right and avoid that monster's high ground. You still have to walk through a choke, but at least it's an option, right? Dorado is a lot rougher. Dorado, you have to push cart and have to push cart directly underneath high ground. Dorado's not so good. Route 66 does have some options, but all these options are long sight lanes and are usually very uncomfortable, so Route 66 doesn't really get much of a pass. And then we get to the real doozies. Rialto's second attack is, when they have a Widowmaker, there's just no option. There's just no option. You have to walk out in the open across the bridge. That's it. There's no flank or hack. There's nothing that you can do. The only thing that you can maybe do is maybe Tracer or Sombra flank across like a triple blink, but even that doesn't work very well. Havana third point. Sucks to suck. You're going to have to rotate out in the open. There's nothing that you can do. Junkertown first. Actually, Junkertown first has some dynamics, which is pretty funny compared to some of the other maps. It is still a bad one, but again, not a good one. Third point, same thing. Second point is doable, but it has its own issues in different ways. Watch point Gibraltar. If you're attacking Watch point Gibraltar and you've lost a fight on second point and you have to recontest into a Widowmaker, you're in terrible trouble. Circuit Royale, and the best part about Circuit Royale is it's not just first point, it's not just second point, it's also third point. Now everybody knows first and second point are the worst, but it's also third point as well. In chat, I say that out of habit. The thing is it's not just bronze, silver, gold, plat, diamond, so on. These issues happen in those ranks as well. This is a huge issue in pro play. So it's a huge issue. So much so that in maps like Circuit Royale, Watch Point Gibraltar, Route CC6, Rialto as well, Dorado, really all of these, it is meta to use as all of your ultimates on late second point to guarantee you cap. I mean, I've seen many times where people will use like 3 ultimates versus 1 or 4 just to make sure they cap second so they don't have to do second again. Like, there's nothing worse than trying to be disciplined with your old economy and then somehow the enemy team recontests and then you lose. It's because then you're like, well, we're screwed. So I guess my point is, without going into the escort problem too much deeper, you guys all know what I'm talking about. The problem is that if you go through the rest of these maps, there are also, even in some of the hybrid maps as well, there are too many points where I can vault second to an extent, right? Blizzard ruled second to an extent as well. There are too many points where the sight lines are so oppressive that the options for counterplay are extremely limited. And like I said, it's significantly more common in Escort than any other map mode, although there's even a few Koth maps as well. You see, the difference between short range and long range is if I died to a Mei, that can be very frustrating, and I'm old enough to remember where people were complaining a lot about Mei Wall. Now, they did nerf Mei Wall, but the thing about Mei is if you go to the Overwatch Hero Cast, you go, okay, well, we're dying to a Mei, guys. What can contest a Mei? And that's the kind of funny thing. If you look at the list, you go, well, Bastion can deal with Mei all right, and I guess Cass can deal with Mei all right with Stick and Fan the Hammer, and actually Genji's not even that bad because Genji can just bypass the Mei wall, and she's got a pretty fat hitbox, and Hanzo, right? Well, we'll get into that in a second. Hanzo and Junkrat can deal with a Mei, and it's not a great matchup, but Reaper can definitely deal with the Mei as well. And actually, Symmetra's not bad versus Mei, and if you get your right click going with like, you notice that the problem we have is that we have a lot of short and mid range heroes. But if you want to play any of these escort maps, if they have a long-ranged hero, you only have 2 options. You either mirror or you go flanker. And as we've already established, the flanker route it's not always a good enough of an option because those flank routes aren't strong enough. For example, Dorado's second point, if they go Widowmaker, you can't play or get near as much value on a vast majority of the cast. I mean, look at this. There you go. I can't play all of those heroes. This hero isn't mobile enough to take a flank, so that doesn't work. Same with this hero, that 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 hero, and that hero. So I either take a hard self-sustained flanker, which actually is not even this hero, right? Or I counter snipe them. That's it. Those are your only options. And there's too many points on that game where that's an issue. This goes to map design. This isn't just hero design. Now, you could argue more about hero design. We'll get to that in a little bit later, because I think it's also a little bit unreasonable for them to expect them to completely change the way maps are designed. But my point is that this is a consistent problem. This is a consistent problem where we have too many maps where only long sight lines work, and we have too many heroes that don't function with enough mobility or with enough range dynamics. I think you could look at some of the heroes that have been designed recently or some of the reworks they're giving them a little bit more dynamics. But like Junkrat just has no way of dealing with a Widow if it's not a short sideline map. And the same thing goes with a Bastion. The same thing to an extent goes with the Cassidy. The only thing that can work is some flank cheese, but even that is extremely inconsistent. So if we go back to the original point here, being worse to it, you couldn't have engaged with them if you chose to. That's why. There's too many heroes on specific points and specific maps. And there's a lot of those maps where if they have a Widowmaker, you just can't do a lot to the Widowmaker. Now, last point I'm going to make here is that I'm not necessarily saying that you need to engage with the Widowmaker to counter the Widowmaker. I think that's fundamentally flawed. Well, I have to be able to beat a Widowmaker in a 1v1. Well, no, not necessarily. You should be able to theoretically play in a way to where you force the Widowmaker to reposition to where you can engage on her because you're outvaluing her by avoiding her. In other words, if I'm playing Mei into a Widowmaker on some maps, I can avoid the Widowmaker sightlines, hi kitty, and completely dominate her tank line or her support line or her other DPS, force her to reposition in a less optimal, cheesy, lame, cowardly sightline. And then actually that means that she's closer to me to where now I can deal with her, right? That's part of the risk reward, right? You can't take a position a million miles away and do whatever you want. But again, that goes back to my problem. On too many maps, you can't do that. You can't avoid Widowmaker sightlines and still engage any of her team. You can't avoid Widowmaker sightlines and push cart. There's no risk. Even Gibraltar first, you can't push cart without walking in front of Widowmaker sightlines on early first or late first. There's no way to avoid it. And that's the problem. You see, I don't have to engage. I shouldn't have to engage on a Widowmaker if I want to find value elsewhere. But especially on maps like Circuit Royale and Dorado and Route 66, you cannot do that. It is impossible. You can't choose to, I'm going to avoid the Widowmaker sightlines and fight elsewhere. No, you can't. You could choose to avoid the Widowmaker sightlines and do jack all. That's the problem, okay? Map design. Now, I will say this post is a little bit corny, respectfully to the original poster. It's well structured, but a lot of the points are kind of dramatic. Snipers strangling the player base growth as a whole is one of the takes of all time. But, okay. Yeah, see, even the comparisons through all these things, like they're all fair comparisons that definitely snipers are played around, but also one thing in common with a lot of these maps, especially for somebody who's seen a lot of these maps, is that these maps in particular have much longer sightlines than Overwatch, so naturally they're going to have more balance for snipers because essentially almost every map in these that I have played feels very much like a Junkertown, and if their snipers were not balanced, it would be impossible. Like it would be just absolute misery. Now some of these other maps, yes, there's different, but also a lot of these other games don't have the mobility options and utility options that Overwatch 2 has. So I do think this is a little bit of a flawed comparison because they don't have tracers and Mei walls, and they don't have wrecking balls, and they don't have Winstons, they don't have Lucio speed, and there's other things that you could do to deal with snipers in Overwatch 1 and Overwatch 2 that aren't present in these games, so it's a bit of a flawed comparison. So I don't like this comparison really at all. I think it's well intended, but it's ignoring so many other things that Overwatch has to deal with snipers, and it's coming to the wrong conclusion, I guess. Overwatch 2 hide behind a barrier wall 9% of the game. I mean, again, even this is an exaggeration, right? We know that this is the case on some maps, but it's an exaggeration. Ignore the main fight and play sniper whack-a-mole the entire match. And probably don't self-peel or get peels. Okay. Snipers with more snipers. Snipers in the top 5 use heroes. Unlike a lot of games, they say the current sniper weapons. You can insta-kill sniper the entire match. Unlimited ammo. Again, it's just the nature of Overwatch, right? Like, that's how it works. Everybody has unlimited ammo. It would feel terrible if we didn't. Now here's a big list of issues associated with snipers. And this is where this post kind of starts to lose me. Not diving the sniper friendly, putting up a bear because having free pick a brawl tank that doesn't have it. Or you pick it doesn't well start because that means your team should yell at you, report them. I mean, again, we talked about does the map allow other heroes to exist? For example, there's a lot of maps in Overwatch 2 where you don't need and you shouldn't mirror snipers. If you're picking Widowmaker on, let's say, I don't know, Nepal Shrine, you don't need to counter pick Widowmaker. The Widowmaker sightlines are generally easily contestable, easily avoidable while still engaging in the team fight. It's still annoying. We'll get to that in a second. That's the concept of the one shot. But it's there, right? I mean, this is just again, it just goes on kind of endlessly. Snipers are a problem, but the devs won't nerf them, so the devs buff dive things. I don't know that this has ever been an issue, honestly. Like, to at least in terms of the balance here, this was definitely an issue with DPS power creep to compensate for brig peel. But this is not an issue. Like, this is a non-issue here. This is a non-issue. Incidentally, life is a third. It's just foolishness. So let's actually pause for a second. Let's talk about one shot. So one of the things that frustrates people a lot about snipers is one shots. Now, that's the problem with snipers, is that a lot of their utility is just through the one shot. If I'm playing versus a Widowmaker on the worst Widowmaker map, let's say Lijiang Tower Control Center, okay? So points here, or the little pillar thing, and then we got the little wall here, and the little wall here, and then you guys know what I'm talking about, right? There's the coast side over here, and then there's the white room over here. You can kind of go through, right? It clearly resembles an Overwatch map. It's a very short sightline map. But if I have a Widowmaker in the back here, it's going to feel bad every time I die to that Widowmaker. Why? Because I was never really directly engaged with that Widowmaker during the death. Now, the reason that I say that's frustrating is, as we said in the previous post, having deaths where you weren't engaged with that target is going to happen. It's unavoidable in a game like Overwatch, but it doesn't make it any less frustrating. And it also makes it a little bit frustrating because it happened instantly. Now, this is where I don't have any solutions. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I don't think it's the most important aspect of snipers. I think having some points being completely overwhelmingly strong to snipers is the main problem. But I don't have a solution for snipers not being a one-shot. Like, my concern is that you would destroy the identity of the sniper in the first place. Maybe snipers are fundamentally imbalanced. Maybe there needs to be... I mean, it's certainly looking at something like Widowmaker, and one of Widowmaker's big problems, and Hanzo to a lesser extent, which we'll get to in a second, is that there is no utility outside of the one-shot, right? Venomine is one of the most, if not the most useless ability in the entire game. Grapple is useful, but not interesting. Infrasights is just entirely used to allow her to set up more shots, even though its team utility is high. Her SMG is worthless. She's very fragile. It is just you play for one shot. Her identity, as Overwatch 2 has gone on, has actually become more simplified, more one-directional with the reduction of her HP, because that has reduced the amount of aggression and flexibility that she can play. Not saying it was a bad change. It just leans very hard into the playstyle that people don't like to begin with. So I think that that's something that we need to look at if you're going to adjust the one shot. Okay, you want to remove the one shot, or maybe you would remove the one shot at certain ranges. Encourage Widowmakers to play more aggressively, more engageable sightlines. So snipers actually would have a fall off at around 40 meters, 45 meters, 50 meters, to where you take a fully charged shot to kill somebody at 50 meters. And anything less than that at farther ranges wouldn't one shot at all. That would probably be something similar along those lines, along with giving her more dynamic and engaging sniper-like options that encourage her to contribute more in other ways. Probably something to consider. Now, Hanzo's a whole nother ball of socks. We'll talk about that one later. But yeah. That would be my thought. I don't have a lot of solutions about the one-shot problem in particular, though. There is a little bit of... I don't know what the term is, but there's a little bit of a bias when we die to a Widowmaker or we have a really bad Widowmaker map, because that's something that sits in our mind, even though it doesn't... Like, Widowmaker pick rate isn't like going through the sky, even top 500, right? But whenever we have a map like that, it feels really bad. It's like whenever you play versus... you're playing a Wrecking Ball, and you're playing into like a Symmetra Mei, that one instance will feel really bad, even though Symmetra Mei aren't very common picks, if that makes sense. Okay, a lot more fun when Ryan, Winston, or Genji are dominant, especially at high elo. Why is that? Because it rewards aggression with fast plays. No, I actually don't think that's the case. I think the reason why Ryan, Winston, and Genji is that, to a lesser extent with Genji, but they feel like honest heroes. They feel like you have counterplay options. There's never any one situation where you go, well, we're just going to lose this fight. There's nothing that we can do. And there's also not fights where you feel like you can completely relax. You see, the problem with Widowmaker is you're either going, oh, this Widowmaker point is terrible, we don't need to care about that, or this Widowmaker is terrible. Or you're going, okay, this is a monstrously difficult Widowmaker point, or this Widowmaker is completely dominating, I'm scared. It's not always like this, but it can feel very black or white. because of the maps and because of also the nature of the precision required to hit a shot. You see, that's another aspect of one shots, is that it requires a lot of precision. Like, a miss is as good as a mile. I've had a lot of games where I would play versus a Widowmaker, and it felt like they were hitting every shot, or I felt like I was hitting every shot. But then I played the next game and I felt like I wasn't. It's just the nature of micro precision, right? I might have gotten just a little bit lucky that game, and it feels horrible. It might have gotten just a little bit unlucky, and my teammates hate me, right? Now, Widow does present a lot of indirect pressure, but ultimately, enough of her utility doesn't come from things outside of just putting the crosshair on the head and clicking, which leads to a lot of inconsistency. For example, if I go into a game with Mei, and I have 8% critical accuracy with my Icicle, and then 15% in the next game, that happens sometimes, but the 8 to 15% doesn't necessarily mean that I lost or contributed nothing the first game. What about my blizzards? What about my Mei walls? What about my mouse one? What about the body shots that I hit? What about my general presence and pressure as a Mei? But with Widowmaker, there's not enough of that skill interpretation outside of hitting the one shot. So if you accidentally get lucky and hit a lot of shots, or if you accidentally get unlucky and don't hit a lot of shots, that's a massive percentage of your value, even compared to something like a Hanzo, and that's a problem. And that's why Winston and Genji, now you guys probably wonder why I didn't describe Genji as honest of a hero. It's because when Genji has Blade, if they have a Nano Blade combo, then it can be very difficult to feel like you can do anything versus that. It can feel like that you're just cooked. And I think we'll get into that in another video. We should get started with a lot of downtime. Reduced downtime. It should be Overwatch major is reduced downtime. Yeah, so this is good. Throwing the other maps, yeah, the problem is that there are really, really good sniper maps and really, really bad sniper maps, and because Widowmaker doesn't have any almost no dynamics whatsoever, then that's the problem. Just trying to skim through this really fast. This is all doomer foolishness, and they're running out of time. They're running out of budget. Like, listen, guys. I know there are people out there that have quit because of Widowmaker and Hanzo. I know it, but it's just not that big of a deal. There's plenty of other issues as well. I think deserves a video, and I think this post has some good points, but it's, I think, very clear that this is not the most important issue in the history of the universe. Counteract them cyber being easy to kill. Counter cyber through damage. But I think it would be a more Overwatch 2 solution to not necessarily make the sniper easier to kill and more snipey, but to make them less snipey, more dynamic, if that makes sense, through some of the suggestions I had for Widowmaker earlier. Block the action of snipey, block the hill with heals peels, don't just nerf the crap out of it. Lower health. You see, this is the problem. You don't want to keep lowering the health on the snipers, because you're just either trashing the hero entirely, or you're making the counters to the hero and the playstyle of that hero already even more exaggerated, right? Oh, dive the Widow now is totally free. You even hit one snipe, she's dead, right? Or you have to play so far now as a sniper to do anything, which again goes back to the problem, is like you're not engaged with the person when she does hit a shot. And to an extent, that also applies to the slower scope and arrow charge mechanics, which sounds good in theory, but then if that's going to mean a sniper has to play safer, that goes again back to the first problem. I'm not saying every hero has to be a brawl hero, but this solution isn't good enough by itself, from my understanding. Anyway, this is the thing though, like you get all these people that talk about snipers, right? And it's just because the nature of the one shot, and the nature is that at the higher level especially, people know when to pick good snipers on good sniper maps, and so they're going to really leverage, and those maps really sit in you when you play as SVB or Sumito or Emong or Flats or SK or whoever. Playing versus a really good Widowmaker on a really good Widowmaker map is an experience that is just unlike anything else. It'd be the equivalent of like in Overwatch 1 playing into a very, very good Mei on King's Row. It just, before they nerfed Mei Wall and such, but it would feel horrible, right? It'd feel absolutely horrible. Or trying to play Widowmaker or Zenyatta on a good Sombra map. Same kind of idea. It feels so unbelievably one-sided that it sits with you for a long time. And it's just, I think that's kind of like what you need to aim for when it comes to balancing things, strengths and weaknesses. But you should always avoid the worst case scenario, right? We need to find what games feel completely unwinnable versus Widowmaker, and then find out why. We don't necessarily need to go, okay, this felt pretty bad, that's fine. there's a lot of games that are going to feel pretty bad, right? This is the one that needs to be concerned about, and that's going to be more to do with the Widow being inaccessible on an uncontrollable, uncontestable sightline when there are no flanks, no angles that you can take. That's my take. Now, skimming through comments here, I want to talk about Hanzo in just a second. Cancers versus a good Widow becomes infinitely more boring, right? Because there's no counterplay. On certain maps, there just isn't any counterplay. Keep going. Be played completely differently. I mean, that is in of itself not an issue. Every hero that you play versus an Overwatch requires you to play it differently, whether you notice to or not. Most of the time, people don't pay attention to that and therefore die to it. You need to be playing differently versus a Ball and a Sombra and a Tracer. You play radically different versus a Mei than you would any other DPS on good Mei maps. You play extremely different versus a Roadhog and a Zarya, and you play extremely differently versus an entire differently support line, including Life, Weaver, Kiriko, and so on. Snipers are a little bit more egregious in the fact that they have not as much dynamics with their playstyle, and some maps require that you two have to develop an entire strategy to counter that, but that has as much to do with the maps as it has to do with the sniper identity. Yeah, and then just so on, people kind of trashing some of his points and be like, well, you're exaggerating. You cannot dive snipers if they're more even remotely, unless you're screaming at people. This is again just exaggeration. Okay, people are just kind of freaking out. Yeah, anyway, I want to talk really quick, about Hanzo, because I think some of the things that Hanzo has makes him unique in a bad and a good way. So Hanzo right now is one of the most strange heroes in probably all of Overwatch. You see, I had this realization the other day. Good 1v1 for Hanzo, good 1v1 for Hanzo, good 1v1 for Hanzo, good 1v1 for Hanzo, bad 1v1 for Hanzo, pretty good 1v1 for Hanzo. I mean, you're going to notice a pattern here that outside of like maybe Pharah, which is not even a bad one, and maybe like Genji, there aren't any bad 1v1s for Hanzo. And this is kind of what Hanzo is. Hanzo is one of the best, if not the best, besides Tracer, 1v1 hero in the entire game. And the only reason that he's not meta is because he struggles a little bit when there are certain compositions where there is a better pick for utility. In other words, if I'm playing a dive comp, Hanzo doesn't struggle necessarily versus Tracer, but he will struggle versus a Winston versus a Tracer, or a Ball versus a Tracer, or a Diva versus a Tracer, right? Hanzo in a sniper composition is not going to struggle versus a Widow alone, but he will struggle versus a Widowmaker and a Ball, or a Sigma controlling his sightlines. He's going to struggle a little bit more. When you're playing in Brawl, at least in the past, Hanzo would do fine in Rhine Brawl, but Mei was pretty good. Mei was a little bit more important in the Rhine mirror trade, and before, Cassidy also had a good shot for being better. Now, Hanzo's probably the best comp is Brawl, but my point is that it's not that Hanzo was ever bad, it's just that there was always something that was a little bit better. Now, the problem with Hanzo, though, is that as heroes get nerfs and things get shuffled around, Ashe gets her nerf, Cassidy gets his nerf, the meta shifts away from hard dive as Sojourn's gotten more and more nerfs over time, is that all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, this hero hasn't been touched in forever. He's still actually oppressively strong in a 1v1. And this has been the case since 2019. So let's talk about why Hanzo is strong in a 1v1. I think Storm Arrow is the number one reason. Storm Arrow is the number one reason. I don't even think it's necessarily the induction shot, which is obviously infinite, doesn't require him to be scoped, and does not only slightly limits his movement. Storm Arrow being basically one of the most powerful 1v1 here cooldowns in the entire game, not restricting your movement, having fast rate of fire, and being able to headshot is a problem. I know why Storm Arrow was introduced to replace Scatter Arrow, and the hot take for me is that I would rather have Storm Arrow than Scatter Arrow. I mean, Scatter Arrow was a lot weaker, but a lot more frustrating in terms of there was literally no counterplay for me dying to that. I think this is fine in terms of better than Scatter Arrow, but we still have a problem of like when a Hanzo has Storm Arrow, there's not a lot that you could do about it. And the other problem with Hanzo, and this is something that kind of goes back to our dynamic identity, is we have a hero with a one shot, and we do have a hero with some utility with scouting, Storm Arrow, and mobility. And then we also have a hero that doesn't need, and this is the key point, he doesn't play like a sniper. So he can have his cake and eat it too. You see, the problem with Hanzo is he has a one shot, but he can play like a Junkrat. Not completely, but he doesn't have to play far away. He doesn't have to play far away. Between his lunge, his wall climb, his storm arrow, even just his hitbox in general, he is a very tricky target to 1v1, even as close range. In fact, there aren't many targets in 1v1s that would beat a Hanzo, especially at a higher level. Junkrat has an advantage over Hanzo up close. Genji has an advantage over Hanzo up close. Torbjorn, no. Tracer maybe has an advantage versus Hanzo up close. Cassidy is tricky, actually, even with Sticky. Bastion and Turret Form generally has a slight advantage, but Hanzo can just avoid it. So you're like, oh, well, that's a few heroes. Well, that's some of the most close range heroes in the game. And Hanzo can beat a Reaper in a 1v1. And he can beat all of these guys in a close range 1v1. It's just more of a skill matchup, right? So you're talking about like close range heroes. Symmetra, nope, she can't beat Hanzo in a 1v1 up close. Not Reaper, nope. Way too hard. And I think that's a little bit of the problem, whereas we said Widow was not dynamic enough, too one-dimensional in her play. Hanzo is very dynamic, but he's too strong in all the dynamics right now, at least in terms of the one shot still being tied to a hero that can essentially play like a brawl hero. That's kind of a problem. Now, you still don't want to play your Hanzo all the way up close, but there's nothing more frustrating than getting a Tracer getting on top of a Hanzo, and he just moves his crosshair and basically takes off all of your HP just by body shotting you. It's not fun, you know, and then you press Storm Arrow, okay, well, now I can't win this 1v1. So, and that's been balanced again, I think, by meta, as I've said. And one of the other little things, underrated things that's kept Hanzo balanced is his ult is probably the worst in the game, if not the second worst in the game. It's second or worst in the game. It's terrible ultimate. So it's kind of kept him balanced because, you know, oh, Hanzo has ult. Okay, it doesn't really matter. But something to consider. A sniper needs either to not have their one shot as easily accessible, or they need to have a one shot, but that they have to play in a way that punishes them if they get caught with their pants down. And even that, I'm not sure if that's a direction that we want to move with sniper. So anyway, that's my sniper rant. I went on way too long, but I think that if you consider the maps, if you consider the design of the heroes that we're discussing, I think it's a pretty nuanced discussion. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. This is not a long, drawn out discussion thought point for me. I haven't been thinking about this for hours. This is just my initial thoughts. So might be hit or miss. But yeah, let me know what you guys think, and I hope you enjoyed the video.